everyone. Oh, I'm so excited that everybody is here at the Teachers Leading Facebook Live series by NSTOY for you, the NSTOY members and friends and family and lovers of the greatest profession on the planet, teaching. I'm so excited to be here and, I mean, really, to actually go after the amazing Diane Smoke, Michelle Pearson, Jamela Coase, Monica Washington, talking about some amazing things of student engagement, equity. And today, I can't believe I'm with the man, the myth, the legend, talking about a very important issue, social emotional learning with Casey Bethel. Casey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Hey, everybody out there. I'm Casey, the 2017 Georgia Teacher of the Year. And I got to tell you, Dorina, I am stoked to be on the phone with you.
I am so excited to be with you, and I'm Dorina Sackman-Ebwa, the 2014 Florida Teacher of the Year. We are together here at the Florida-Georgia line, ready to inspire, empower, motivate, and celebrate our teaching profession, and really talk about an important issue that's going on in education today. One of the 4 components and the standards that we're going to be talking about, or strands, if you will, at our 2018 National Network of State Teacher of the Year Teacher Leadership Conference in July. The 4 of them are: 1 is teacher leadership, student engagement is the 2nd, educational equity, and this one, social emotional learning. And
I'd say it's the most important, wouldn't you?
Well, you know, knowing that it's coming from you, and I'm, like I said, I'm like the Tasmanian devil on a double espresso right now because I'm with you and you know so much about this. And without further ado, we thank Walden, we thank everyone at NSTOY and the family just for us to have this opportunity. And I want to get down to it because I think it's a really important issue, like you said, one of the most important. So, Casey, if you don't mind, can we start with you and a little bit about social emotional learning and how you got started really about it and just how you feel about it as an educator?
Right. Well, I got to tell you, I'm ecstatic to be a part of this conversation. I think that social emotional learning is at the core, at the heart of what we seek to do as teachers. I think about this. I think about my kids first, which is an interesting place to start. Dropping my kids off. I have 2 kids of my own, the 6-year-old twins who were in kindergarten this year, just finished up kindergarten out here in Georgia. And I have the great pleasure to drop them off at school every morning. And as I pull into the drop-off lane every morning, we repeat our 2 family goals for them. I tell my kids every day, and they repeat in the car, that our goals are to be a good person and then be smart. And people are always surprised that as a teacher, I prioritize those 2 goals that way. Of course, I want my kids to be smart, but in my family, it starts with being a good person. And I want the same thing for the students that I teach. And to me, that's the best expression of what social emotional learning is about, teaching young people to be good people, be good citizens, and how much that involves knowing their own emotions, being able to navigate their daily decision-making, being able to relate appropriately in social situations with each other. And I think that regardless of what level we teach, regardless of what subject we teach, regardless of what region or place in the state we teach, we ought to be embedding that in our daily practice.
Well, Casey, you said something very interesting that I really want to get this conversation going about, the word embedding. Doing right now, I think I'm in 29th grade at Walden University, and my doctoral research is actually on emotional intelligence in teachers, which I know we're going to talk about as we embed that within this wonderful live series. But what I've heard a lot about when I learn about emotional intelligence, EI, or other people call it EQ, emotional quotient, the big issue is these programs, these SEL programs that are being implemented. And, we have to teach SEL classes and courses. But you said something, embedding. Can you talk a little bit more about how you feel that embedding SEL is much more important and effective than just actually taking a course in SEL, and how we can elaborate on that and make big decisions in our classrooms for the next year coming up?
Yeah, again, like I said, regardless of what level, I teach high school science, and that's one thing that it's important for me to promote. A lot of people have the misnomer or the misconception that SEL is something for elementary schools. But kids in middle school and kids in high school are still growing, still navigating their own challenges, and we need to be helping them with that. But SEL is not something that we do for the first 10 minutes on Fridays, or something that comes in a scripted program out of a book. When you're a good teacher and you love the kids in your room and you want them to be better and better themselves, SEL is something that you're doing at every moment of every class and every day. I think about this one other experience I had at my high school. It started in the hallway with a mentee of mine. This kid's name was Isaiah, right? I love telling the story. He was a mentee of mine who had made some poor decisions, and he and I were chatting in the hallway. And I told him, I said, Isaiah, if you had better self-esteem would protect you from repeating these same mistakes. And he paused for a moment. He looked at me and he said, Mr. Bethel, adults are always telling me to have self-esteem, but they never tell me how to get it. Woo! And when he said that, it threw me into a weird space, because then I realized that off the bat, I didn't have the answer to that question. And it made me think about and reflect on my own self-esteem and how do you build such a thing. And I went and did a bunch of reading, and I tried to find the answer for him and for all the other students that I teach. And what I decided on was that amongst the answers, there's a lot of research. Amongst the answers, they say keeping promises to yourself is a good way to build self-esteem. Well, what I was able to do in our follow-up class, not the next day, but 2 days later, was embed that into a health lesson we were doing in our class. We were talking about goal setting, and I provided them with this document, this tool, to keep a record of all the promises they kept to themselves, and then reflect on the bottom about how that made them feel. And the feedback from the students, even in high school, was that they saw differences in their own self-esteem. And that's a good example for me of what embedding social emotional learning is. I was able to inject that into a lesson I would have been teaching anyway in my health class about goal setting.
Well, I really like the way you put it, and you said embedding, but the story itself really, that story gets me. And the reason why it gets me, it makes me think about the great Nate Bowling. Nate Bowling says some powerful, powerful things, and I see him and I follow him, maybe stalking a little bit on Twitter. And he said something pretty amazing about AP classes and how there are very little Black males in AP classes. And it made me think about my second language learners who are absolutely fantastic in the actual subject matter, but lack the linguistic ability to be in those classes according to the teachers, which I think is in linguistic inequity, if you will. And the point is, he actually said something about it on Twitter, and he said, don't just retweet this article about AP and Black students not being in AP. Actually do something about it. And it made me think about what your student actually said to you. Yeah, that's great. You're telling me. It's almost like we live in a world of retweets. If I retweet it, it's out there. If I tell you, it's out there. But where's the action? We had a student go up to you and say, I don't know how I'm supposed to get this self-esteem. That's where the SEL comes into play. We don't just retweet things, as if you will, the proverbial retweet. We don't just tell people what to do. We don't tell people about it. We actually have to put it into action. And I think that's my next question for you. What if there are teachers out there right now listening that have absolutely no idea how to embed it? Now, that was a perfect example, but what would you do for an SEL 101, regardless, K through 12? What would you tell teachers to say this is how you could start embedding it into your class? Or what maybe you think they should read, or any sort of resources they could get for SEL?
Well, one of the things I'd like to remind them of is that SEL, again, like when I started, I said, should be at the heart of everything we do in our daily practice. I read somewhere that the whole goal of education is to prepare young people to do three things. One is to understand the world around them. Two is to make their own contributions to the world. And then three is to be able to express what it is they understand and what it is they contribute. Well, in seeking or wanting to embed more social emotional learning practices in your class, it's about looking at your lessons through that lens, with that wide frame of how am I equipping kids to do that, and recognizing that the kids who have a connection with their learning and who are processing, I think someone called it emotional metacognition. Thinking about what I'm learning and how does it make me feel and how does it relate to me can often equip kids to take that next step. Mm-hmm. And as a teacher, being intentional about watching for those things, certainly like my story with Isaiah, intentional about not missing those cues when young people tell us this is something they need help on, and being intentional enough about being ready to respond is some of the first steps to being able to be a good practitioner of social emotional learning.
And I think that's interesting when you're saying the cues, because recently I was just listening to some feedback of actually teachers taking emotional intelligence training. And one of the things that I'm fascinated about is really the teacher has to know and see those cues, but they're always afraid, oh my gosh, is this going to get away from the lesson? This is going to get away from the lesson. But actually, research has said that the connection, the emotional connection to content, where that's dealing in your limbic brain and then it can come out of your neocortex, but the prefrontal lobe, where all this information is actually going to be processed and then bring out, that is growing constantly. And so I know I'm neuro geeking out just a little bit, but as our children grow, I mean, the brain continues to develop until we're 26, believe it or not. So at 26 is when it technically stops growing. So if we have this brain that's constantly going in something called neuroplasticity, in which we have this, not just repetitive things, but experiences that happen over time. If we have these social emotional learning experiences embedded in our lessons through K, 1, 2, 3, and this is being taught, that actually impacts our brain, which impacts our ability to be empathetic. So what you talked about is so important, but it's difficult to do when teachers say, well, I got to learn this. I have a scope and sequence and I have to do this and it's standardized testing and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. How do you balance SEL with the demands of teaching?
Well, a good friend, I want to give a nod to a good friend of mine who teaches elementary kids, third grade. And what she has in her room is a set of wristbands that are different colors, green, yellow, and red. And what she's done is train the kids that the colors represent different types of emotions. Green because I'm really happy, yellow because I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm sad, and red means I'm dealing with an emotion that I don't know how to process, anger or frustration. And she's trained the kids, even in elementary school, to be able to take a step back, diagnose their own emotions, decide which wristband they need to go to the drawer and get and put on. And she, as the teacher, can recognize this kid changed the color of his wristband, and I have the right prompts, the right comments, the right questions to be able to respond to that at the same time that I'm still teaching reading or math or numeracy or whatever it is I was doing. So it doesn't have to pull away from the content that you're trying to get to. That's a great example. I like.
I think it's a fantastic example, and kudos to that teacher, because like you said, again, I'm going to go again with that word, embedded. But I do have a challenge for you, and I think maybe this is where I could possibly come in. I'm not sure, but here we are talking about SEL, and I don't like buzzwords. We have social emotional learning, emotional intelligence, and we have all these buzzwords going on in education, and that's that retweet thing that I was saying. But we really want to put it into action. How then, if we have all these ideas to create the social and emotional learning environment for our students, K through 12, how do we do this when we actually aren't even in touch with our own EI? So my question to you is, we're asked to increase our social and emotional learning for our students, embed it, as we will, once we, have this process. And again, it's a process, not a product, of incorporating SEL into our lessons. But how do we actually teach it if we don't even know our own, and to get in touch with our own? Don't you think that would increase the amount of SEL embedded in our instruction if we actually were more in touch with our own emotional intelligence as educators?
I bar none, hands down. I brought my notebook. I've got my pen. And the thing I'm the most excited about tonight, to sit at your feet, because I know that this is an area of expertise for you. I know that you're really, really focused on emotional maturity and emotional preparedness of pre-service and early service teachers, and are they equipped or not to step in their classrooms. The only thing I would add or would say at this point is teachers, we can't lose sight of the fact that we're constantly in front of our audience, and that every word we speak, every action we perform, every response we give to a situation is an opportunity to model for students what emotional maturity looks like. But again, that takes teachers being knowledgeable about their own emotions. So